Hey guys, it's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Hey, Bro Flamingo, how are you?
As you can tell by my voice, I'm recovering. It's not COVID, but there's something going around. I've been trying to call it. Yeah, I was trying to call in for a long time. I was going to say, Sam shadow banned me after you found out that blacks were the real Jews. I think you might have been mad about that.
Bro Flamingo, your phone's crackling a little. Is there a way for you to...
Hold on, let me get off.
The real secret is that...
Much better.
Yeah. I just want to say the real secret is that blacks are the real Italians. That's what they don't want you to know.
Right. Speaking of that real quick, 'cause I know, Kanye's just been on the white supremacist world tour, so, it's probably not dying down. But what I and I'm really interested in what Brandon has to say about this too, but again, I know Facebook is a cesspool of disinformation. Twitter is too in a lot of ways, by the way. And I noticed, this kind of with a lot of black people, not a lot of black people, but these few black celebrities spreading these, Black Hebrew Israelite talking points or these Nation of Islam talking points. And I've been very curious about where they came from. I think, well, wait a minute, where is this coming from? It's weird. And I went down the rabbit hole, and there's from Black Hebrew Israelites, it started from this guy named William Saunders Crowdy, I think his name was. There's another guy named Wallace Fard, who started the Nation of Islam. And the FBI, look, I'm putting on my tinfoil kufi, okay? But apparently, they couldn't track down who Wallace Fard was. He had a lot of pseudonyms and stuff. They tracked down his wife, and he just disappeared. But apparently Elijah Muhammad, talked with him for a long time, and, got all the ideology, then I guess started converting everybody. But essentially what I'm trying to say, though, is that there's been this, these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in the black community. They come from these places like the Nation of Islam. You know what I'm saying? And Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, I'm not saying all of them are like that. You know what I'm saying? But I just see on social media. It's also Hoteps too, by the way. Hoteps is a whole different thing. But all these conspiracies, share this kind of thread from the Nation of Islam and almost kind of cultish and religious places. And also,
and Kanye's, I should say, Bro Flamingo. Also, I think, look, it's hard to figure out where he's coming from to a degree, but he's very Christian, and there's some. I think that's part of it too.
Yeah. No, Emma, absolutely. Because here's the odd thing. For example, Emma. The Black Hebrew Israelites, you would think there's just a black sect of Jews or Judaism. It's not. They're mainly Christian. They just think they're Jews. You know what I'm saying? And that tracks with Kanye, because Kanye is just an ultra Christian, but he thinks he's a Jew. Okay, it's literally Black Hebrew Israelite talking points. But and it kind of flows. I know I'm rambling a little bit, guys. I'll wrap it up. But what I noticed too, because you guys have been talking about disinformation on the internet, how the algorithm just juices the most outrageous stuff. And, it finally occurred to me, I'm saying, for certain black people, this will be reaching them because, I'm saying, it's the most outrageous conspiracies, anti-vax stuff, right-wing talking points, by the way. It's funny, you go into, the Hotep pipeline, you go into one of these pipelines, you're going to run into, Candace Owens, you know what I'm saying? Or you're going to run into, the Ben Shapiro talking points, literally, just with a black face on it. That's why there's guys, on the Facebook, Hodge twins, Candace Owens is up there, Officer Brandon Tatum, these crash dummies. It's disgusting. But the last thing I want to say about that is that I just noticed that these conspiracies are also juiced by the algorithm, and they permeate. That's why I even talked to my friend before. I was like, "Do you know where this conspiracy comes from?" He just spouts it, but he doesn't realize it comes from the Nation of Islam. Or, there's a guy named Dwight York from the Nubian Nation. He started a cult or whatever. He had a pedophile compound. And I just realized, and one last thing, I'm sorry, but I should realize too. Now, here's a genuine conspiracy theory I do believe on some level, or at least I think there's some validation. There's a reason why the FBI went after the Black Panthers, like a leftist organization, but Nation of Islam and all these other guys got left alone. Because at the end of the day, you abstract Nation of Islam's talking points and ideology. It's not too far from the white supremacists. That's the key thing. That's the key takeaway I noticed with these conspiracy theories, where you start abstracting away from like from race and the material conditions. It's just Nazism or fascism, just coming from a person with a different skin color. But the kind of more insidious thing about it is that there's actual genuine talking points, like or actually genuine grievances. Like for example, one of the threads to get people to kind of go down this pipeline is they're talking about reparations, or general oppression. But it's not too far off until you start getting to like, the Jews are just raking people. The Jews are raking black people over the coals, or like you said, there's some Jew somewhere, there's some Jew somewhere,
doing something.
Making black people's life hell somewhere. You get what I'm saying? And I just realized those talking points are going to get reinterpreted. Dominant society talking points are going to get reinterpreted into the right wing of any community on some level. You get in this country. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean,
it's actually very fascinating.
Are you going to say something, Brandon?
Oh, I mean, no, you go first.
I was just going to say, like, this is a pattern that states use to sort of control certain populations that are getting out of control. There's this article by Mehdi Hassan, Blowback, how Israel went from helping create Hamas to bombing it. And it goes into, this isn't conspiracy theory. Listen to former Israeli officials such as Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev, who was the Israeli military governor in Gaza in the early 1980s. Later told the New York Times reporter that he had helped finance the Palestinian Islamist movement as a counterweight to the secularists and leftists of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Fatah Party led by Yasser Arafat, who himself referred to Hamas as a creature of Israel. The Israeli government gave me a budget, the retired brigadier general confessed, and the military government gives to the mosques. Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation. I mean, this is a way to attack the left by basically empowering other groups to take that over.
Precisely. Again, Matt, and I want to hear what Brandon has to say, but again, Matt, when I was doing this research and kind of putting it all together, I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's a reason why, like, MLK got assassinated because, because he started talking like a socialist. Also he's black. You know what I'm saying? He started talking like, but also you look at the Black Panthers. Oh, yeah. And the other thing, too, the Black Panthers are left wing, but they also fought the government. Nation of Islam, whatever, they'll sit there and rant and rave, but they're not actually actively going against the government. Oh, okay, we can leave these guys alone. Oh, they hate Jews too? Oh, okay, cool. We like these guys. You leave them alone.
Yeah.
I see now. Of course, race plays a key role in this, but there's also an overlapping ideology. No, go ahead, Brandon. I'm sorry.
Oh no, great call. I love conspiracy theories. I will say, despite being aware of Black Hebrew Israelites and Hoteps, I'm not as familiar with the history of any of them as as much as you are, obviously. But I will say first, you touched on a good point that's quite obvious that people kind of forget. Like, there are plenty of Jewish people who are Black. Like, there are plenty of Jewish, and people will say they know this instinctually. Like, they know that there are Arabic Jewish people. Like, they know there are at least we'll be able to identify as white Jewish people. But when they operate within this sort of world of anti-Semitic tropes, they pretend as though that is, Jewish people operate in sort of a monolithic race when it's just not true. Like, there are plenty of, Black Jewish people, plenty of Arabic Jewish people, who aren't Black Hebrew Israelites. They're just normal Jewish people, obviously. A lot of this stuff also comes from a lack of familiarity, like actually not having any, social interaction with groups of people other than, whoever you happen to be engaged with. But I think to your larger point, it's true, despite a lot of the eccentricities of any of these conspiracy theories, whether they be sort of Norse-based white nationalist groups in America or sort of far right Black supremacists, which there aren't as many of, obviously. There are a lot of overlaps in sort of the bigotry that they have. There's anti-Semitism, there's a misogyny in a lot of these groups too, and Black Hebrew Israelites, there's a misogyny there that is kind of obscured by calling people queen a lot sometimes. It's just right. But as a society, we have a hard time identifying a lot of those overlapping themes, because a lot of those overlapping themes are there for like the same reason you have identified, because they exist within our society at a deep cultural level anyway. It's not just like the Nazis who invented anti-Semitism. A lot of that was already there in Europe. It was already there in the United States. It was already there in a lot of parts of the globe. And the Nazis just, synchronized it with a lot of other social things going on. And of course, the industrial age to engage in, one of the most brutal acts of genocide of the 20th century. I mean, well, the most brutal act of genocide in the 20th century. And, the pretend that it exists in some sort of vacuum that's outside of like these things that we see happen time and time again are, is just incorrect and factually inaccurate. But people want to pretend like, Nazis invented anti-Semitism. They invented these kinds of bigotry, and that you can't find all of the precursors existing in America and Europe before that. And then, it's the extremism that people are more focusing on, the extent that they did to like make their world resemble the bigotries that we, in many ways are indoctrinated with since birth. Like Emma said, because a lot of our countries are Christian nations, they're Catholic, they're Christian. So there's a sort of anti-Semitism baked into it, but I would also say, what also helps with this is a very anti-intellectual strain that exists in the United States, where a lot of these sort of, a lot of these movements, let's say, white supremacists, black supremacists, these fringe movements rely on a general illiteracy that exists within the populations that they target. We have a lot of vulnerable people in our society, financially, emotionally, socially alienated people who don't have a firm grasp on where they are, both individually as a person, but also like where we as a society are situated in our own history and past, and where a lot of things that come from. And so it's very easy to get them to think on an individual level, get them to believe that all of their preconceived notions that they have are things that they were born with. Like, their suspicion about like Jewish people is not because they've seen that in media, they've seen that reflected in our politics since they were born. It's because of some sort of innate truth about it, and so for a lot of people, it's hard to come to terms with the fact that the things that cause extremism in our society, for the most part, are things that we do on purpose. We teach people to be individual. We teach people to be very standoffish, and I would say inherently aggressive in their ignorance, especially as it relates to American history and culture. And we don't really provide them with the tools to find out like where they are situated in those spaces. And so it becomes very easy for someone to come in and be like, why you're poor? It's because of Jewish people. Do you know why you're poor? It's because of Black people. Do you know why you're poor? It's because of women. Do you know why you're sad? It's because of Black people. It's because of women. Why are you jobless?
Also,
and go.
No, I'm sorry, Brent. I just wanted to add in real quick. But I noticed the Black community, there's an extra step there. One of the common themes I found among my casual research was just that they're looking for an identity that's not enslaved. I swear to God.
It's an empowerment. It's an empowerment.
It's like your book, like the main book of everyone. We're the actual main characters.
Yeah, right.
I mean, exactly. But I've heard everything. I've heard everything from like, we were the true indigenous Indians here. We've been here for a while. To like, we're the real Jews. I've heard everything. Or like even like the Mayans and Olmecs. There were Black people there. Look at the statues. It's like to your guy's point. It's like an empowerment, it's almost like a racial myth, much like the Nazis. So you guys, I noticed it was always a couple of steps away from that, like that fascist type of, we're the like Matt said, we're the main characters. We're the good guys. I'm sorry to cut anybody else. Go ahead.
No, that's a good point, because we see a lot of that too. But that's a great point. There's an imagined history aspect to a lot of conspiracy theory groups, a lot of like far right groups, and we see that amongst white people too. It's obviously going to be different because of the racial characteristics of whatever group we're talking about. But white people, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier about whiteness. White people in America specifically imagine a unified whiteness that just simply has never existed. They imagine they'll ask you, why can't we have a white students association? And you explain, like, well, you have like a Slovakian Students Association, an Italian Students Association, British Students Association. You have all these associations that are probably going to be primarily white by nature of like nationality or ethnicity, but you're choosing to want to associate yourself with this sort of unified white identity that doesn't really exist outside of, oppression, doesn't really exist outside of slavery, doesn't really exist outside of a lot of these structures. Empire building. The same is true about, blackness in some sense. A lot of like the nations of Africa are only nations due to colonialism. They have various ethnic groups, various tribes, various, histories that are incompatible with each other. And we've seen this across the globe, but they're mashed up together. And so to pretend as though like there's something definitive you could say about like black people is just not realistic. But we can even look at this tendency in groups that aren't necessarily on the far right. You see a lot of this kind of individualism in pursuit of radical agenda that is capitalist friendly across the spectrum. Like liberals do this all the time too. Right. And people get confused by the fact that like, black liberals aren't good politically generally. They're just good about a subset of what we would consider to generally be leftist politics, which is, anti-blackness or, the opposite of anti-blackness, pro-blackness. But once you get them out of that like individual mindset of like, okay, well, we're not talking about like what black men in Atlanta deserve. We're talking about like, let's say single black mothers. Were you there? And it's like, oh, people need to get a job. We're talking about Muslim people. Like, I don't want Muslim coming to the country. It's like there are just a lot of like individualized narratives. There are a lot of like shorthand ways that people have decided to, become radical in our society that like only vaguely resemble leftism, because we have sort of included in leftism this idea that like, well, if you do things that we consider to be generally conservative, but in pursuit of like, getting black people to that point, like black capitalism, or in pursuit of getting white women to that point, then like it's not inherently conservative because you've smeared this thin layer of like non-white male over it. But in reality, it's like we know that like the narratives, like you said, that are going to be most enabled by our government, the narratives that are going to be most enabled by our media, not because there's a deep state, but because these are both capitalist enterprises, are going to be ones that are capitalist friendly. So they want to bring far right people on to the show to talk about how like what's really wrong with the world is that it's controlled by Jewish people and not that it's controlled by billionaires, including the billionaire that runs this media platform that we're talking about it on. They want to bring you. He's there to save you, save you from those secret bad people, because he's a billionaire in public. You know everything about him. But you'll see the same thing amongst like liberals on the news. Like the solution is not that we let's say do reparations, or like even more specifically, let's say that we do sort of like wide sweeping, non-racially specific buckets of solutions. It's about like an individualized solution to get people to the point that they have identified the highest people in our society to be to. Like if a white male is allowed to do it, the biggest form of radical for a lot of people is that like they should also be allowed to do it. A lot of people's ideal version of like equality is that like black people can own slaves too now. And that is just not acceptable. And a lot of people will argue online with people who have had hard lives, black, disabled, women, whose version of equality is like, well, I need slaves now, because at some point white men had them, still have them. And that's what leftism looks to me like, my personal, moving forward. And, it's just not something that on the left we can not say like we can't incorporate it into our politics. We just have to meet it head on and be like, no, that's just not what we view as liberation. We don't view, letting, having a more gender and racially and religiously integrated billionaire class as the, solution to our struggles. If that's your solution, you're not a leftist, you're a liberal, or you're a fascist, or you're somewhere along that spectrum, but it's not what we do here. And that's just the end of the day, but I think we find ourselves just engaging in a lot of these, like, how come this person believes this obviously American rooted like bigotry? It's like, because we were all taught that. You got to unlearn it, and throwing a sphinx on the front of your like, far right group doesn't make it not far right. Sphinx? Is that how you pronounce it? Sphinx?
Sphinx, yeah.
Last thing, guys. Let me say this real quick, because I'll jump, because I know I'm taking up a lot of time.
No, this was a really great call. Thank you, Bro Flamingo. But yeah, just closing thoughts.
My closing thoughts. Two things. One, I keep going back to this. But I think, again, maybe I'll get to it sometime. My unions got me just working all the time. But I think the destruction of the Black Panthers blew open a hole for this type of propaganda. There was no black counter narrative, and also a lot of them got co-opted by the New Democrats and got tossed by the wayside. You get what I'm saying? AKA Sister Soldier and all the other garbage. You get what I'm saying? And another thing that I noticed too in my union, there's Africans there. There's actually Africans in the union. And the one thing I noticed, you know what I'm saying? I always say this to the conspiracy theorists that I meet or whatever. I'm like, you ever notice like the Africans aren't obsessed by the Jews? You know that you came about that by our proximity to Europeans and our enslavement. You know what I'm saying? It's like programming almost. You know what I'm saying? So like the Chinese and the Africans,
proximity to a white supremacist narrative as well that is inherently like anti-Jew.
Precisely. And the very last thing, the second thing I want to say is going back to that communist or whatever who called in yesterday or the day before, whatever, Emma, I'm sorry. Shout out to Jamie Peck and maybe like two others. Every kind of tanky or communist that I meet are just obscenely annoying. I'm sorry, guys. I love you. That's his best. Take care.
All right. That was such an aside, but love you too, Bro Flamingo. Thank you.